Hi and welcome everyone to the PUPS headquarters. PUPS is a Swedish organization. In English, we call ourselves the Swedish Development Forum, and we work with increasing knowledge, facilitating debate, and improving engagement for a just and sustainable world. And I'm so happy today to be here with our three guests coming all the way from South Africa, Tanzania, and Guatemala.
Well done.
To talk to us about how the COVID pandemic has affected you in your different contexts and in connection to your work and how it's developing now. So my name is Karin Kleber-Blomqvist and I work here at PUPS, and I am jumping in today from my colleague Matilda, who unfortunately couldn't be here. And I usually work with our Almedalen group who goes to the big politics festival here in Sweden. And yes, we are a members-based organization, non-politically affiliated, non-religious. And I am so excited to have you here today. And let's start with a short introduction of yourselves. So, Isabel, would you like to go?
Cool. I suddenly realized I should not have, I would have gone to Annabelle's side. My name is Isabel Frey. I'm the executive director of NGO think tank in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we were Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and part of this year has been our change and transitioning into social policy initiative. We work with advancing policy around social security as a primary way of addressing poverty in South Africa and inequality. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And our partnership with ACT Church of Sweden enables us to draw both on the kind of partnership that they have, the network, meeting people such as the International Reference Group members, but also the intellectual and ideological perspectives of social protection, which Sweden is known globally for. And of course, Sweden and South Africa have a long history where Sweden supported the anti-apartheid movement. So it's always a joy to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. And
actually, I'm Gloria Mafole. I'm a lawyer, human rights activist, and gender activist for almost 20 years. Actually, I'm so happy to be here. Currently, I'm the country director for International Tanzania. But for the past 8 years, I've been working with the Christian Council of Tanzania. And during COVID, actually, I've been very active, supporting the religious leaders to bring in voice through Church of Sweden, but through 11 as Swedish actors towards addressing COVID in Tanzania. So I'm really happy to be here to share what are the lessons that we went through. And I think that will add the importance of Sweden in the development work.
Brilliant. So happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Annabella.
Hello, Karin. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you all. I'm Annabella Silvia. I'm from Guatemala, and I am human rights defender from around 30 years. That is only because I am older than you. Yeah, it's only a thing of the age. And I'm working with an NGO, international NGO, Protection International, which is an NGO working in the protection of collectives who are defending their rights before mostly economic interests in their territories. So yeah, very nice to be here to share with this very nice family.
Thank you. It's so good to have you here, and you have all such diverse backgrounds and how you're going to come at this issue, and I'm so excited to dig into it. So just a bit of a backdrop. So the COVID crisis is the Ukraine crisis has sort of taken center stage in news reporting in Sweden. I can assume in many other countries as well. mask mandates are going away, or in many countries, people are queuing up to renew their passports here. In many ways, Sweden's trying to go back to normal, you know, if you look at it from a COVID point of view. If you look at it globally, 59% of people have been fully vaccinated, but the levels of vaccinations are very unequal. So in the continent of Africa, we see that by only the other day, approximately only 15% of adults have been fully vaccinated, compared to the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, where you see actually 2/3 of people being fully vaccinated. So you see very large differences there. Your countries all represent countries who sort of faced the pandemic quite differently with regards to government response. You've been struck. Looking at all of you. But yeah, we'll get to that bit in a while. Handled the pandemic quite differently, being struck quite differently by the pandemic with regards to effects on healthcare and such. So it would be really, really interesting to talk more about this. And my first question, really, just firstly, is how badly were your countries hit with regards to people falling ill or losing their lives? Maybe if we start with you, Annabella.
Okay. Oh, well, in the case of Guatemala, the first measures facing the pandemic were quite bad measures. The government started, as in many countries, locking down the population and creating a strong fear from people to one to each other, which is not very good. In fact, when I arrived to Sweden a few days ago, I was surprised because people was in the street without masks, and you see your faces are quite quiet and calm, and in our country it's like, don't be so close to me and without mask. But after that, when the vaccination started, it was really bad because we have a very corrupted government, and they made business, wrong business with the vaccination. They bought 16 million of doses of vaccines, not using the system of the OMS, but buying directly to Russia, Sputnik. And those Sputnik bought by the government never arrived, or only a few parts of the vaccines. So at this moment, almost 2 years later, we have only around 30% of the population with the complete vaccination, and 50% of the population with one dose of vaccination. So this is quite bad. Most of the vaccines we have received have been donations from other countries, India, Israel, even Mexico donate to us vaccines. So yeah, maybe just to start, and we can speak later about how they use also the COVID pandemic to close civil spaces.
And with regards to people falling ill, were there, as you saw in many countries in Europe, for example, there were actually a lot of deaths from COVID. Yes. How was the situation in Guatemala?
We have around 18 deaths, 17 and more, but we really do not have enough data to confirm that is this. And I must say that we are speaking about around 18 deaths in a population of 16 million of inhabitants. So, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
that's barely anything.
Yeah, but as I said, there is no data, there is not enough data, and many cases were not reported. So who knows? Really, who knows? By the other side, there is people in communities that think that this could be more than related with the public policies on health, related with indigenous medicine and indigenous practices to face the illness.
Very interesting. And Gloria, how was the development in your country with regards to
the pandemic? First of all, it was a big shock and threats, and people were really worried. And our president took it in 3 phases, I can say. First, he closed the primary schools, the secondary school, and universities, but allowed the prayers, because he said we can be healed through prayers. So we can go to the church, you can go to the mosque, you had multitude as you want, because you have to pray to God, these things will go. And that approach was a bit worrisome, because if you have said the children should go to school, all the schools were closed for 3 months, from primary school to university. Then you allow the same number, and you know in Tanzania we really pray. If you go to a church, you might be like 500, yes, 200. So it's a huge number of people going to the churches and that was the first thing. So the approach was like, we should pray. So everybody should pray. We have the national prayers and things like that. Another approach was the traditional approach, that this is common flu. How do you treat the common flu? Do the steam bath, try to take some ginger and other herbs to the local community, and out of that you'll be okay. So use the traditional approach. Another approach was like an economic issue of the West. You know, the Western have decided to destabilize our economy, and we should stop, we should continue working. After all, they will have no food. So everybody should continue, because it's an economic boom. Okay, so that was the approach. And the 3 approach was better, for example, about the religious faith. And this is the challenge I will also say during the vaccine. So the issue was like, we have to pray. The leaders were like mobilized to pray, and others even brainwash others that this is like a satanic thing. You can pray and it will be taken away. Okay, people were like couldn't go to the hospital because you can pray and it really goes. And it was really, really bad, because first, people are not tested. That was not given. And even we have a single national lab that has been tested. You can imagine the queue, and they can decide to say you are positive or not. So the cases that we have tested were centralized to the national lab, and they're the only ones who are given the mandate to give the information in that. So actually, as he said, we also get a bigger problem of data quality. And because of that now, and not trying to take the proper measure, the religious leader took a big part now. They had to come as a big actor, because they were told by the president to pray. Okay? Now they started, at least when they saw the situation is getting worse. And as you say, they are the ones who bury people. You know, if you are dead, the priest or the sheriff will come to bury that. And so the trend was increasing. In 1 week, they can bury 10 people, 20 people, and they were like, the situation is getting nowhere, we need to do something. So they introduced, for example, the shorter mass. Instead of you can have 2.5 hours mass to bring it short, to ensure that they sit in social distance, to ensure that they have sanitizers and the ushers will stand in front of the church to ensure everybody wash hands, or use to ensure that everybody has the mask to go into the mass. So at least they start taking some steps. And you know, in Tanzania, when you bury a person passed away, the families, you can stay week in a family. All of us there. You understand it? The whole relatives will be coming to this house, sitting there, and imagine that the person who has passed away has COVID. You can imagine. So there are families that lost like 5 people sequentially because they went to the burial practices as we do. You know, that is common. So we had like people were like, now we are dying. I hear about my real auntie's family where they died 5. Yeah, because they don't know. They didn't find their brother. They were all. Then after they died, the next day, 3 days later, another one died. Another one died. So we have families that really lost like 4 times because of that practice. Now we have this issue of vaccine. How do we bring the vaccine? Another thing.
Sorry, I saw the slide.
One is like the vaccine, especially Christians. The vaccine is satanic symbol.
You guys
know the Christian
randomly?
The QR code, you know, you get the QR code. So you know the QR code is a satanic symbol. So you shouldn't be vaccinated because you be given. That's why they say you can't travel without the vaccine. You should show your QR code. So the faith part of it. Then you really have to go back to the narrative. And the religious came in as big a man to ensure that you correct the narrative towards the satanic symbol in the Bible to ensure that people. So the level of vaccination is still very low because of that belief, but because of also the denial that this is common flu and it should be taken. We are used to have flu and tuberculosis. So going really deep to the villages, they will not be really agreed to the vaccine because it's a common flu. But also it is like the Western are trying to reduce our production. So we have no basis to that. So that has been the narrative. So looking at the context is very challenging that the vaccine are there, but the rate of the people to be vaccinated is not that huge. And it is true because Tanzania is also very hot. Really, the pandemic was not bad because of the heat, and it always comes during a bit of a cold time. March, April, May, June. It's okay because now the heat is really huge. So people say, no, it's a common flu. That's why in May we have a bit of cold. So those are the issues.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We're going to discuss it all further as well later. And Isabel, what about
you see, now it's good being the third.
Yeah, right.
I think just looking at a couple of different aspects from an economic perspective. On the 24th of March 2020, our president announced a complete lockdown. And I don't think many of us were prepared for what was going to follow. So for 3 weeks, you couldn't leave your house at all. And all the businesses came to close apart from the mines and some of the hospitals. And that economic lockdown started being lifted in certain sectors. But the critique now is that it was too severe. So we have a situation where a lot of small businesses went under and haven't been able to recover. Which leads me on to the question of inequality. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, and the response revealed the deep levels of inequality. So if you are suburban and middle class, mostly white people, you could lock down to your house, whereas the majority of people don't have formal safe houses. So people living in informal settlements in shanty towns, I mean, if you live in a shack, where how are you going to lock down? But the infrastructure to cope with that kind of reality just didn't exist. And for a lot of people, the concerns that they had was, instead of addressing lack of access to food or anything, government brought the army out. And so people were being arrested because they were not practicing social distancing, whereas they said, we have a one-room shack, like how can we all be in this one room? And how is that healthy? So the inequalities were really absolute. The other aspect was that the gap between formal and informal was revealed. So for formal businesses, to some extent, there was an income support, and that, I mean, it was run really badly, and there was a lot of corruption about funds, but it's nominally there. But for informal workers, there was absolutely no way of tracking or distributing income support at the first level. So even the question of public spaces became problematic, because if you trade in public spaces and the state says you can't be in public spaces, but you could be in a private office, then again, the complete lack of comprehension of what the majority of people are facing. I think Gloria was talking about schools. Our schools were shut down, and again, the inequality. So if you have Wi-Fi, if you have access to data, you could do schooling online, but the majority of kids have no devices, let alone access to data. So, I mean, that only in the last 6 weeks was lifted, to the extent that a lot of schools would have half days. So basically for poor kids who had a bad start economically in life, they had 2 lost years. So and there are no plans how to deal with the catch-up. But in addition to that, for many school kids, we have a school feeding scheme for the 60% poorest schools. But that came to an end, of course, when the schools were not accessible. And we tried to advocate for a kind of bag and grab school feeding like they did in some of the US schools. But we were told that wouldn't be feasible. And yet the funds have disappeared. So you can't even sort of allocate and say, well, then let's distribute those funds on a local level. So the point of the inequality and the poverty is that it became much deeper. And sadly, the response by the state has been to stop measuring. So we had a special COVID-related poverty measure. It was it went every 3 months, and that's been stopped. So we have no new data to look at poverty levels. I think the question, the interesting thing about the healthcare is, so in as much as Tanzania might have said that there wasn't a pandemic, for about 5 years, my country denied that we had HIV/AIDS. And the contradiction, well, not the contradiction, the comparison between how we responded to this compared to the HIV/AIDS pandemic was quite interesting, because this was sort of hands-on. This really was, the country was, well, the government was fully behind it. And in a way, there was a political statement that was being made that the current president said that, well, he was much more of the people than the past president who denied HIV/AIDS. I think the question that came to many people's minds, though, was, if you're willing to vaccinate and the vaccinations were free to people who didn't have medical aid, why are you not willing to give us food to survive? And one of the things that we managed to succeed in winning was the agreement to pay cash grants to adults. It was the first time ever that adults received cash grants despite the constitutional right. So for us working as socioeconomic rights, human sort of defenders and advocates, that was a really, it was an important victory. But all these schemes are short term. So if you say, why are you willing to acknowledge someone's poverty because there's an epidemic, when for the rest of their 64 years of life, you're not willing to recognize that they don't have enough food? It exposes the fact that leadership is completely out of touch with reality, or there's a denialism of the fact that that we want to see ourselves as a first world advanced developed country that's really for about 10% of the population. and the extraction of labor and just the growth of misery doesn't sit well with our constitution that's meant to be the most progressive constitution in the world. I just wanted to mention that. So again, at the beginning, it seemed to be a real coming together between the private sector and the public sector in questions of COVID testing. Private hospitals opened their doors and allowed people to come in who couldn't afford to pay. And it actually looked as if the formal embrace of the policy of national health insurance, which has been on the books for 10 years but hasn't been advanced, was going to that we could win out of this crisis situation. But then there was huge corruption of the funds, and the private sector weren't getting compensated. So that was quite sad. We've had about 100,000 deaths. So I think for us, the Delta wave was kind of the most significant. We've got a lot of top scientists working on it. So it was, we got really angry when Omicron was discovered, because it was discovered by South African scientists, or we were the ones who sent it to the rest of, who sent the knowledge to the rest of the world. And immediately we saw Boris Johnson and various other leaders closing the borders, and people were saying, but why are we being penalized for sharing our knowledge? So, but it does show that to some extent we've got people working on it. But again, in terms of vaccinations, our small elite sort of private sector was saying government's not working fast enough to get hold of the vaccines, and we're now actually destroying vaccines because we had enough and people are not coming to get vaccinated. So a lot of people are vaccinated for the first sort of jab. And then they kind of said, well, we're still alive, no one's dying. So there really wasn't a push. There has been some religious kind of backlash, but basically people live, levels of crime and violence and hunger are such that living is kind of extreme living. So the idea of a pandemic is just something else to add on to that. And there's no sense of, I think life is just really cheap in South Africa, poor people's lives, and the majority of people are poor. So the middle classes, we've all been vaccinated, but it's not because the vaccinations are not there, but there's just a sense of we don't really care, which is very sad.
Very, very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's all super interesting to hear how it's sort of developed in different countries, how them handling it. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the economic effects. So you've already touched upon them, the issues of formal and informal sectors, when public space closes down, people who, for example, trade at the side of roads can't do that anymore. How is it looking in Tanzania and Guatemala with regards to people's livelihoods?
Yeah, actually, we didn't call because it was like you have to work through. Our president, looking at the way the economy of Tanzania is, he knew that if you shut it completely, you couldn't manage. So we didn't have the shutdown in the work. The only that were taken care of were the schools, that you should close the school. But the economy, people are like, you have to wake up and do a lot of work. So people continue working as it was, but as you said, it was a global issue. The business sector needs other business partners from different. So actually, they were really affected because they couldn't work. But we have, for example, the port. People had to come and take. And the port is like, if you are closed South Africa, Kenya, they can't come, it becomes a bigger crisis. And the issue was very big because testing was very expensive.
Yeah.
Actually, we tested for $100 for a test. What's $100? Okay, $100. And that was like, for example, if you are supposed, you were a truck, you were coming to the port to pick up issues in the port, any driver before coming to Tanzania, the test for $100. Wow. Then when you leave, you also have to test for $50. Okay, so the testing was really expensive. And actually now is where the issue of business comes. That it is like, I can't do business with you because the cost of doing that becomes very high. And because of things are not coming in, because of, we get much products from China. And China was really close. Transportation of goods become a bigger challenge. So the business people who depends on travel cheap to China to get some goods to come and sell couldn't, because they were not allowed. And it was like when you come in self-guarantee, you were supposed to be quarantined for 7 days. And you do it by yourself, yes. For 7 days. And you reach yourself to the designated places, which sometimes are very expensive for people to do that. So actually, as you said, other people also now, because it's an individual tool, people start also not going much to the market, not doing a lot of walking, even though it's open, but we are self-conscious. So some restaurants closed because people could not go. And the job now, we are really destroyed. So the ones who have been working in the restaurants, the ones who have been working as drivers of the long truck drivers, because the port in Dar es Salaam said Burundi, Rwanda couldn't do. So really the economy also a big drop. And he said, we have no economic packages. We have the economic boost.
Stimulus package.
Stimulus package, so for that wasn't there. So now it's like people are trying now to find their own way out, to try to start. So economically, that was a big issue. That some employment were lost. Okay, but the cost of doing business become very high because the goods were very high, and actually the self-quarantine and the testing costs were really high.
And did that also cause issues for households? Because I can assume prices would have gone up as a result.
Actually, yes, that's what I say. Economical things really change even the household. Because if I don't work, because I was working, then how do I give food to the family? Okay, and now we start the gender issues and gender-based violence issues arose. So we experience a lot of gender-based issues like beating, killing one another. People have to live at home with kids, from morning to evening. Because when I used to go to work, now they can't. They spend much of time. So abuse, the experience of children also getting, the school children getting pregnant when they in the lockdown and things that when the school were revived, some of the students couldn't go back to school because they are pregnant according to the setup and then lockdown.
Thank you very much. And Guatemala, how was the financial situation?
In our case, particularly, big business enterprises did not suffer because of COVID. But small business, many of them closed, and many workers in different services were fired. Workers in hotels and stores, restaurants. So the poverty, according to the Latin American Economic Commission, extreme poverty increased in Guatemala during these years. You mentioned that in Tanzania, only a small elite got vaccination. And in the case of Guatemala, during the beginning of 2021, which was these were the first months we had access to vaccination. It was only in the capital city and surroundings, but in the villages, in rural areas, people did not access to vaccines. And also, as schools close, there is a long-term impact in the economy because we have 2 years with children going to the primary school without learning how to read or write. So now we are not looking at these impacts, but we will see in some years, which is it's a big problem. And also, when you mentioned that some vaccines have been destroyed in Guatemala too, at the end of 2021, more than 1 million of doses were destroyed because they expired. Because when Russia sent the vaccines, they only have 2 months of life. So it was enough time to put the vaccines. And now many nurses have been obligated by the state to pay for these vaccines that they cannot administrate to the people. But it's difficult in 2 months to administrate vaccines if people doesn't trust the government to go there. And those who have received Sputnik, now they cannot travel to US or Europe because Sputnik is not accepted. So this has also an economic impact for some people.
Right, thank you so much. And Gloria, you already started touching a little bit on this, and sort of the side effects. So there are the obvious effects of people falling ill, suffering from long COVID or dying. There's the economical effects, either directly through government policy, through lockdowns and such, or through global trade being disrupted, and that in turn affecting people's opportunities to do business. But then there's these other side effects, like children being kept away from school, being kept in the home, issues of teenage pregnancy going up in Tanzania. I know they were going up in Uganda as well, for example. What were the other sort of side effects that maybe were less expected? That you experienced?
If you go around the communities in Tanzania, as I said, we have families that are really down because they lost a lot of people. And they live with that, they are grieved. You know, I always, if I go to my auntie's place, I really feel it. Because, you know, in 2 weeks, we have 3 new graves with flowers at home, you know, we bury at home. So my aunt came to my mother, and I always say that this is what we didn't see it coming. We said, and you know, it was like a serious stigma. You know, you cannot cough because if you cough, like everybody, yes, you cannot sneeze because like everybody, why should you sneeze? So the stigma part of the COVID was such a high thing that, you know, it was like, don't go to that house. That house has COVID. And imagine that person is living 3 graves at her compound. You know, she came to my mother. Then I felt it, saying, you also are afraid to talk to me because no one comes to talk to me. I'm so stigmatized with the community. If I want to go to the market, everybody's like, don't go near her. If she wants to go to it, everybody's like, despite maybe she has COVID also, she will just, even though 3-4 months have passed after that incident. So there are really people who were affected psychologically and emotionally because of the stigma that came with it. And actually, in Tanzania, we don't have so much psychosocial support systems that we can take people to the psychologist. So that are the unseen and unforeseen things that if you go around the communities, they can share with you. Maybe it's not documented, but that is my personal experience. And I felt very, very bad how the stigma was. Just like I say, if you cough, it's like, why should you cough? But people normally, we can have some water and you're choking something and like you could see the struggle of coughing. But as you say, it also, because of also taking so much of the traditional herbs and whatever, some people develop because they use lime much, and some also develop like so much acid and gases in their body because of trying to every time have water with lemon tea with lemon, sometimes excessively as a traditional like way to curb. So we have such, as you said, effects that
We have a reflux.
Then we can also, as you said, a very serious gender-based violence that happened. The teen, that beating, that killing one another, hurting one another at home. Some are reported, some are not reported because very serious effect that people are afraid to go to the hospital. You know, people are sick. For example, a person has a clinic, maybe he's a heart person, is a diabetic person, is a cancer person who is attending the clinic. Everybody was like, if I go to the clinic, I may come up with COVID. So people did not attend hospitals, and everybody was shying away from getting the health, going to the hospital. And really, sometimes many died, not because of COVID, but because they couldn't go to the hospital. And not that because they couldn't go, it's just the stigma part of it. If I go, I may come up with COVID, and they stayed home. So the ones who are supposed to attend their normal clinic, because of the stigma, because of the threat that I might go, and you know, the elderly people are like very funny that this is for the elderly. COVID loved the elderly because most of them were the ones who associated diseases, you know, like diabetes. Right? So many people of that age passed. And so it was like, this one is for the elderly. So they couldn't attend the clinic because of the stigma why they need that services. So those are some of the things that people didn't document, that living in a community, looking at how it goes, you can just say.
And the situation in Guatemala, I know that your organizations produced a report where you were looking at effects on human rights defenders during COVID. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on that, on how the shrinking space for civil rights defenders.
This is, I am a member of the advisory council of another organization, which is International Platform Against Impunity. And this platform is part of a big coalition working in Latin America. And the coalition is going to launch a report in few days, next week, something like that, on how have been used the money of some banks, international banks, as Inter-American Bank, and how the governments didn't use very well these loans. So more than the report is not focused on the effects on human rights defenders, but in how these governments in Latin America did not use very well the money, and how that impact in societies and in communities. But I could say also that in the case of Guatemala, there were in 2020, if I am not wrong, there were 11 states of exception in the country. I mean, Guatemala's law has these states of exceptions, which could be state of CH, but other kind of state of exceptions, reducing rights and liberties. And 2020, we had these 11, 3 of them in all the country, and others focused in some of the villages. And in 2021, we have 10 states of exceptions. So if we look at this, COVID has been used as a pretext by the government to reduce rights and freedoms, and also to control people in communities, particularly human rights defenders from communities. They, for a long time, many months, we couldn't travel within the country, and so people who were defending their rights and territories couldn't move and denounce and also do some research or investigation on some human rights violations. So yes, I think that we saw how the government used this pandemic as a way to have more control and militarization of the country, because we saw how militaries had a lot of space. They do not have the constitutional mandate to be on the streets, but we had them in the streets, and also they started to be part of the vaccination program. But this was more a kind of way to show how the military the militarization is good, when they did not give enough resources to the health ministry to do this job. Yeah.
Maybe to add on to that, as a civic space, the issue of information is key to human rights defender, for advocates, and for saying. So if you don't give out statistics, you are not allowed to say anything about it. The government is not giving out. And another thing is, like, the hospitals are also not allowed to test, because, for example, the whole testing is done in the central lab. So it's not like other diseases that you can test from the hospital level. So it's like the information is centralized for human rights defenders to us. Then it becomes like really shrinking the space of saying things are not working. Because if you say things, people are dying, they say, how are you sure? Show us the evidence. And they can be easily sold and taken care of. And it was a huge battle, for example, in Tanzania, until the bishop decided to give the data. And the later president could say anything, because the bishop and the priest were saying, we bury people. Okay, so we can give you that since this month started, we have buried this number of people. And you cannot diffuse that data, because they can show you the names and where they buried. Okay, so it was like, now at least somebody has said something is going on. So the real lack of information really contributed to human rights defender failure to defend what is going on. Even they, for example, people are following up children at home and the way they were undergoing sexual violence at home, yeah, because they're at home for the 3 months they were at home, trying to show the rays of the teen pregnant. And they were like, where did you get that? And they were really called by the state organs to show the proof. So they were really threatened because of the shrinking space that no data should come. And the data is only centralized with the Bureau of Statistics. And the Bureau of Statistics is quiet, it does not want to give you the information. So that was it.
Thank you. That was a really good addition as well. And going over to South Africa, what were the unexpected sort of effects there? And if you could elaborate a bit on the role of society perhaps as well, that would be wonderful.
I mean, I think it's been mentioned by Annabella and Gloria, but in South Africa, domestic violence really was critical. And in fact, our president said that we didn't have one pandemic, we had two pandemics. And the problem is, although you can vaccinate against COVID, you can't against domestic violence. What was interesting was that in the beginning of the lockdowns, the state outlawed the sale of alcohol, and that had a significant impact on reducing domestic violence. So on the one hand, you had an increase of people being at home, so that increased some of the prevalence, but the levels of the violence was lower with the lack of alcohol. And that became quite a steep fight because the alcohol industry was very well organized. And I sat in many meetings where I've shared with others how the different waves of their defense about their right to sell alcohol. So initially they said that they needed to sell because it was going to go off. And then they said that their right to trade, a constitutional right, was being violated, and that also didn't work. So then they said that the workers' rights to trade and to be paid, and the great pickers' rights to be paid as seasonal workers were being violated. So it was a really interesting way to see how effectively organized they were. Needless to say, alcohol is now being sold as freely as it was beforehand, and the accident and emergency sections of hospitals are as full as they were. Another really serious implication, particularly for women, was an increase in mental health issues. The surveys that I was telling you had been done until they were sort of rolled up. They demonstrated that for women as heads of households, the inability to know where food was coming from for their children was the greatest concern. And so depression and anxiety increased. Suicide rates, just in Johannesburg, the city I live in, increased by 75% over a 12-month period. And these were aspects that nobody anticipated, and we didn't, like Tanzania, we've got very few free or kind of government-provided psychosocial kind of facilities. So if you're middle class, you can afford your psychologist, but the majority of people, they didn't have that. The other aspect from a health perspective was that because the capacity was being used for testing and vaccination, and also COVID ICU, the kinds of treatment, the chronic treatment, antiretrovirals for people living with HIV, they weren't distributed, and TB as well increased dramatically because we have high prevalence, especially the comorbidity of HIV and TB. And so that's now increased the level of infection, which will lead to AIDS. We saw a statistically significant increase in orphans, as well as people who'd lost parents, and mostly mothers. And so adding to the vulnerability of children, and these were the kids who weren't able to go to school. So the rate of transactional sex increased. So then HIV increases, and it's a very vicious cycle for girl children, but children generally. I think I mentioned the point about the military, and the interesting thing is there was an increase in militarization, and soldiers were saying, "We taught to kill. Don't send us into townships because we don't know how to do other things." So there was a tension there. But I think we also have to look at the positive aspects. So for us, I mentioned at the beginning, but the fact that working age adults were given access to Social Security was amazing. And the fact that within about 3 weeks, the state had managed to come up with a mobile phone-based application and approval system, which is now distributing cash grants to 10 million adults. It was incredible. And a lot of civil society were quite critical, and they said, but not everyone has access to a mobile phone. And that's true, and that's why you need civil society to point these things out. But I think that sometimes civil society also needs to give recognition for positive steps that have been taken, and to see how that can be built on. So, I mean, really where civil society was, well, we kind of saw the emergence of a privatized civil society, and that was interesting as well. So a lot of the people who were talking about testing were kind of private sector people. So organizations that were linked to our biggest private medical health scheme is called Discovery Health. And suddenly there were sort of clinics staffed by volunteers, but all very middle-class people. And they had a very pro-private sector approach in what they were doing. So the sense was the state was a failed state, corrupt state, let the private sector take over. And that's going to have a long-term impact. In fact, a few weeks ago, the president was saying, well, so many of our government departments are failing, so should we bring in the private sector? And our president, a member of the ruling party, of course, being president, is very pro-business. So the trade unions are very concerned about the impact this will have. We failed to deliver, so let's just privatize. That's going to be quite dangerous in terms of trying to rebuild a broken state. Where we did work very well as civil society was in gathering data about the benefits of the Social Security grant. So, I mean, literally overnight, about 21 million additional grants were being paid on a monthly basis. So that's a massive redistribution. So for years, many of us have been saying it's the most unequal country, we need to redistribute, and we hadn't succeeded. So the fact that there was a relentless pressure to have that ongoing has been really successful, and we continue even today. I mean, this morning I was told there was a meeting with the Department of Social Development, which we've been asking for 3 weeks. I have to say, well, I'm not there, but it is bringing community-based structures together with middle-class NGOs, and so it's been helpful. But I think that a lot of so right now in South Africa, we're anticipating a 5th wave. And we've seen the daily infections rising. I mean, like my colleagues and comrades here, it was very weird walking here not wearing a mask. I kept expecting to be, I mean, at home, if you go to the shops and you forget, you've got to like really make an effort to not be thrown out. And here it just feels vulnerable. And also the fact that we might be getting infected, you know. But yeah, I mean, we're not sure how this is going to impact on the fact that poor kids are now going back to school. And so you almost don't want the scientific evidence. I mean, I was joking about the 4th wave, but right now we're all kind of saying, well, maybe we shouldn't react. So the whole faith in the state has really failed. And government is really upset about that. They said, we were called on to be proactive. We were proactive. We were called on to kind of respond to science. We did that. Like, we can't get it right. But it's as if the plight of the 60% of the 60 million South Africans who are completely isolated from the formal sector just don't exist. So we have elections coming up in 2024. And it will be interesting to see how smaller political formations might actually stand a chance of challenging the liberation ruling party in ways that were never before seen as possible.
Yeah, the ANC has been very dominant in South African politics, right? So it's interesting to see that they're taking this sort of turnout for smoking. I mean, I knew that Ramaphosa was very pro-business, but also sort of looking at it, taking this privatization angle is quite interesting because that's something that Sweden has gone through very much as well.
Right.
Privatization of public goods, schools and hospitals and such. So I'm sure there's a lot of conversations to be had there on
apparently our president is quite friendly with your prime minister, but I mean, so just I'm not sure if that, but I mean, so every day we haven't got a problem with our electricity supply. We don't have enough, and we haven't been maintaining the electricity plants. So we have apps on our phones, so it tells you when your electricity is going to go off. So right now we've had 2 in my suburb where I live today. But the point is, so it was under apartheid, it was built as a state-owned enterprise. ESCOM is called Electricity Supply Commission. It is because there's been so much corruption and the money's been taken out, there hasn't been maintenance. So Ramaphosa then announced that he thought we should privatize it. And then nothing happened for the first sort of 6 months. And someone from the Trade Union Federation, COSATU, which is in a political alliance with the ANC, said, well, basically, he's just waiting to really lose any value so that his friends can buy it at a much cheaper rate. So, I mean, there is no trust at all in the sense of the democratic project, really, essentially. And it's just seen as a way to get rich quick. So our national airlines is basically being semi-privatized. Electricity, our steel kind of SOE was sold off. And it's almost as if there's a picking up the carcass of that which was left. And it's a sorry state to be in. So a lot of people are looking forward to a date in which the ANC loses. And within the ruling party, I have to declare of which I am a member, our inward discussions are about, well, like how do we keep what we have rather listening to people and saying what are the problems that we should be addressing. There's a kind of a balkanization, and it's a very destructive situation to be in, which is why the populist political movements are growing. I mean, there's this one guy called Untitled Lux, which means lucky light, and he's going around fomenting xenophobic violence, saying that everything can be blamed on the foreigners, we need to kill the foreigners. And across the whole of sector, even within some of the churches are supporting this idea, as if you need to have a national scapegoat to cleanse us somehow. And political leadership are not intervening because they don't want to alienate potential voters who are supporting what Nhlanhla Lux is saying. So you see this massive rise of populism, and the concern is at what stage that becomes completely anarchic and unable to be controlled. I was trying to end on a positive note, but then we should have stopped talking about 15 minutes ago.
I think we can get back to the positive notes, but the effect of COVID on democracy is a really interesting issue and an important issue. I mean, I know in Sweden we've also seen faith in government lessen. In the beginning, everyone was sort of rallying behind the government, wanting them to take strong decisions, and then after a while, everyone started questioning them, and you can definitely see like sort of a dip when it comes to support for political leadership. And how has it been in Tanzania and Guatemala? And I think in Tanzania as well, it should be said that the president passed away last year, so you had a change of leadership sort of during the pandemic.
Yes, actually, we had a change of leadership, and that is where we didn't the vaccine in the countries, because now we started to take the scientific measures to ensure that we live pandemic in the scientific way, and that is where we have vaccine coming in. And when the vaccine comes in, now the issue of the brainwashing and the state, and as you say, the doses that we get first were also expired because people are resisting. And people are like, why should we go? Because we are okay. And this is satanic. So it was like, yes, we are happy to have the vaccine, but the acceptance now among the community is a big issue that we really have to work on. And I said, actually, that is really where the role of religious leaders in Tanzania come across. And everybody is like, we can't do this if the religious leaders don't support the government to do that, because it is deep-rooted faith in culture and the way it was told, the narrative of it, and they really play a very big role. And until now, they're still trying to use the church settings, the mosque settings, to bring in the vaccine. For example, on Sunday, people who want to vaccinate, yes, if you go out of the church building, you can meet nurses and they can.
And it's free.
Vaccinate. Yes, it is free. So you can imagine that how it was. But actually, to me, the positive part of the COVID, which we really have to, we never thought, it stretches us. All what we have in this world is our families. Because everybody sometimes is too busy forgetting that they have a family, but everybody was like, go back to your family. You can work from home. You can be with your family. And this really made us think a lot of that our family are the core. That even at the end, everybody will say, we don't want you. The only family is the only that what we have. So I think that is a big lesson that I really got out of the COVID, and very positive. It really taught me how to treat my family and take it as the best thing that I have, because when everybody says no, they're the ones who me, because the employer will say, work from home, do your things from home, don't go to the market, take care of the family. So that is something that we really need to build as a center institution. And I think the COVID has, I think in many places, let us think about the family as an institution that we really need to nurture. We need to put it in place to ensure that there is cohesion in the part of it. But also, as you said, COVID has taught us in a very positive way. But globally, we can have something that will all fight, despite being white, the underdeveloped, the developed, and it's that we can get, as we talk of climate, COVID also taught us that we are equal and we can die equally. And sometimes we need togetherness to ensure that we address common issues of humanity and concern. And also, as you said, the issue of inequality, thinking that, okay, we can stay in Sweden, we are well developed, but can you lock yourself and survive? Can we lock in Tanzania ourselves and survive alone? So the issue of inequality and the equality was really broad, bringing us to think the way as a global citizen, that we can't travel, we have to find a way we can continue our business across, because we do business together, we live together, and things of that sort. To me, that was a very positive way of thinking, as people used to make fun that we have global citizenship, and didn't get into our mind in real sense. COVID told us that we really global citizens. One can start COVID, and it will affect the South African while we are up north. Yeah, and we really need to think globally and to let our leaders think it in a very positive way, taking it as an alert that we have the global concerns and we need a common address to deal with it.
Thank you. that is a very nice thought. And I do hope that you're right and that it will be applied to other major issues such as such as climate change and antibiotic resistance, biodiversity, all of these major issues, and poverty.
Well, maybe I could say that first days of the pandemic were key days to get trust or not from the people. And in the case of Guatemala, government did not show the will to protect people. I mean, not a real will. And for example, when vaccines came to the country, the information was very few and was not in the, because in Guatemala there are 21 indigenous people with different languages, each one. And with a good public policy on health, you need to inform people to ensure that people is well informed on what is the vaccine, why, and which kind of side effects could have, so people can decide and consent to receive the vaccine. But if you did not do during the beginning, it's difficult now to obligate people. It's not possible. It's not acceptable to make it as an obligation when you need to create conscience. And maybe one of the good effects of all this have been that now there is more conscience on the need of a good public health system. Because in the case of Guatemala, 57% of the spend in health is this pocket spending. I mean, it's people paying for their own health. It's not the public system. The public system covers less than 35% of the health needs. And so if you don't have any money, you could die. Yes. There is no access to health. So now there is more conscience that the state has the obligation, the duty to fulfill this right. And the other side, when I was listening to Gloria, I thought that indeed in Guatemala, one of the things was that finally with the pandemic, it was shown to everybody that indigenous peoples were right when they have been defending environment, the nature, defending the air, the water, because this pandemic is related with this system of death. So they only have been in the right way, defending the life. Yeah, I think that at least this is one of the lessons of the pandemic for us.
The only thing that we will forget is the technology and information sharing. I think that was the big part of the pandemic that we have to think around the global. You know, the misinformation was found in Twitter, in Instagram, in YouTube, in, you know, the fake news. That's a good thing. And you know, it really traveled. You could see a clip going around. It's a huge misinformation, and people could just take it as it is. And so you see, US is like one doing thing, and this is doing, so don't do it. So for sure, the misinformation The use of technology and the social media needs really to be regulated. That's my big lesson from COVID. It should be regulated across the world, because it's like if a person here creates a misinformation clip, in 10 minutes, it is in South Africa, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Asia, in Latin America, and it creates a bigger problem. How do we use technology and information that are put in technology in a manner that when we have pandemics, when we have war, we are able to control, to ensure that public get correct information? Because I think we are suffering the pandemic for 2 years also because of the information that went across. Because it's not like only in Tanzania that the information and but people don't want to have vaccine. It's not only in Tanzania, it's across the world. Even in Europe, I know there are some people still who doesn't want the vaccine.
Yeah.
Why? Because of the information that was put in the social media. How do we deal with the information and technology? I think that is a huge lesson. Being thankful and bring as a huge debate as global citizens.
So if I can just, it was interesting because what Gloria touches on to some extent speaks against freedom of speach. So it's that question of where you draw the balance.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you're advocating, I know that you're not. But again, it comes down to two freedoms. And one of the massive debates ongoing in South Africa was about whether we should have mandatory vaccinations because of the low level of voluntary vaccinations. And what was interesting was that the main trade union federation, COSANTU, initially said absolutely no way should workers be compelled to vaccinate. It should be a choice. And then when we saw 30% vaccinations, they were one of the strongest sort of pushers, because a lot of bosses, employers, were using the lack of vaccination as an excuse and a reason to fire and retrench. And they said, well, we can't have full workforce when people are not vaccinated. So it was really interesting when the national interest comes in and should supersede individuals' rights to secede from public interest matter. And who is the one who determines what is right and what is not right. But I finally also just wanted to say, because what Gloria was saying about technology in South Africa, particularly the digital divide emerged. So those people who have access to Wi-Fi and who have access to data compared to the majority who don't. And at one stage when the epidemic started to affect us, many of us were calling for free access to data, because data in South Africa is almost, I think we're one of the costliest countries. And there were ways in which that could have been made into a public good. It could have been nationalized, basically. And unfortunately, civil society lost that. We just, somehow they got lost. Because right at the beginning of the outbreak, a new world was possible. And there were so many things that came through, but hopefully it's something that we will pick up and proceed to push for. When we had glorious ideas that we could produce a device nationally that every house could have access to, that kids could get their schooling online and with free websites, so websites with data free kind of access, and then we forgot about that. So I think it also talks to whose voices, with the interests of those whose voices are heard. And if the voices are middle class voices and you have affordable Wi-Fi, you don't think about data as being a bread and butter issue, when actually it is. And I hope globally the question of access to data becomes a much more important issue, because it's clear that this is where the world is moving to, but those who don't have are going to be left even further behind. Yeah. So that's my appeal to FUF, to FUN, is to possibly start looking at how you can use your links and your networks to gather support for a free data world as opposed to a data-free world, which we don't want.
We'll make sure the upcoming seminars, one of those will
Exactly.
it is a really, really important issue. I mean, this is what I was I was working with the sort of Africa region as the pandemic hits, and you could really see the digital divide and what a massive issue it was for children suddenly just not being able to access any kind of education. And I mean, even in a post-pandemic world, once you reach the higher tiers of education, access to data is crucial.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be able to go online and find research when you're writing a thesis or whatever it is, you know. So it's definitely a really important issue. I want to open up the floor to the floor to ask any questions if you have them. And for people online as well, if there's any questions that you would like to ask our panel. Yes, we have a question here.
Yes, and it's to Gloria, and we know that the president who died perhaps in COVID, and he denied the existence of COVID in the country, and then the new president came, and now you also told us how strong resistance there is, or people are not eager to get vaccinated. Do you think that the information or the message by the former president is still having an impact on what people believe and think about COVID?
Yes, actually, as I said, because it was faith-based, it was faith narrated, it was traditional narrated, and people trusted their president. It is still affects the way they think, the way they look at the vaccine, and the way they want to address COVID. And as is different from the saying that we have masks, in Tanzania, mask was not an issue since day one. So it's not a big deal whether you have mask or not, because that wasn't the approach during that. That's why I say in the first place, he took some measures. He said there is a pandemic. He said on March that we have a pandemic, we are going to close the school, we are going to do, but due to our economic situation, we are not going to have lockdowns because we need to have work, and as a country, we can provide people with free food and whatever, which was okay, as you said, because people also, it's true that we can't do that. So telling people not to work completely wasn't a good idea. But as you said, the approach now in the way people behave, and actually, people, I came to realize during the pandemic, really we need to have people really trust their leaders and their words. And the leaders have to be very careful, whatever they communicate. That's why I'm still back to the communication and the miscommunication that we can bring to the public and the way it will really affect the people. So I'm like, that communication still sleeping.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Did your president die of COVID?
No, actually, I can't say because what we
There
were
was no
told,
data.
what we were told by God, there is a legal framework that says provide the existing president to say what happened to the president. And when the current president announced to the public about the death of the late president, he said he died out of other complications, which he did not say that she had COVID. So actually, I can't really say straight.
Yeah.
So
But
that
there were
was the public announcement that we have so far. Unless she come and tell us the otherwise. But that was what was conveyed to the public.
Any other questions?
Well, something to add, I think. A lot of interesting things. And thinking of some of my friends who from Sweden, but also I have some friends from Italy and Greece, and some of them who are doubted about their governments and such. They have decided not to get the vaccine, for example. And I think that's like a common factor. This the distrust of the governments. And it seems like it's a bit similar here. So what you've been into that a bit now, but what more has to be done to get more trust to the governments, like in different countries here. Do you have something more? Yeah. What do you think about that? Like, what have you done to? It's a big question. But you've been on to it.
How do you fix your country?
You've been on to it so
That's
far.
what we hear.
Yeah, I think I would say the government will gain trust if they communicate in real truth. To me, that we need to bring that in front of us. Okay, what is happening? As you said, if our economic is bad, tell us it is bad. If we have problems, tell us in truth we have the problem. So to me, they will really gain trust through the communication that real people trust. Because it is like, as you said, we're in the age of technology and information. So you cannot give us quickly fix, because we will have go to the Google page and say, no, but our president has lied. And I have evidence because the situation is one truth. So to me, it's like the government, if the government may gain trust the community, they really have to communicate the truth. If we are and live the truth, okay? It's not like you tell us you're in bad economic situation, but we see you living in lavish cars and having all these big things, and you say, okay, you're in a bad situation. No, if you tell us we're in a bad situation and we are going to do some measures in the bad, also leave that. So tell us the truth and leave the truth. That's the big challenge.
Sorry, Annabella, what you raise is interesting because it's the breakdown of societal institutions, and so as society, as globally we're transforming. So if you don't trust the political leaders, I mean, Gloria spoke a lot about how faith-based leaders, and I love that thing about counting the burials. That was really an innovative way of kind of providing data. But where do you find that? So you mentioned the family. In my country, the family is really the place where most violence gets done. So we don't really trust the family. And where do you build those spaces now? And can we use this opportunity to build in a constructive way as we sort of look forward? And you mentioned also what I liked, it was the juxtaposition between how we've been individualized through isolation, but we've become part of a global kind of society. So possibly the ability to share that information is one in which we can be building constructive narratives of truth. But I mean, one of the things that our president did was to have regular streamed messages, and they started being known as the family meetings. So he would call a meeting, everyone's like, Papa's called another family meeting. And that was good. I mean, the fact is that people stopped believing what Papa was saying, but it did suggest that there was a yearning for some kind of badge of inclusion which you could trust.
I don't know, because I think that to trust the government, we need that this government practice democracy, transparency, redistribution of the wealth, good governance, to ensure that there is press freedom, freedom of speech. I mean, you cannot trust a government which is not democratic. It's quite difficult. When you mentioned your president, or now you mentioned, I remember the president in Nicaragua, for example, they denied completely the COVID during the first year, and also forced people to participate in a huge demonstration through the streets without any protection, showing that COVID didn't exist. And they didn't show the data, the information. So we really don't know how many people died in Nicaragua because of COVID. So I think it's more a thing of democracy.
It's simple though.
I really agree. I really don't, as you say, the families and the level of families and what to do with the families as a center, because sometimes I say reflection of our leaders reflect the family that they go. Okay, it's as a center where we grow people, we do their mindset, the way we treat people. You know, I would say, if I look at a leader, I know where he or she grow. Because if you have 4 people, they are the sick. You have the best one, you have the notorious one. No, they are 2 kids, but with different character. How do you award them? How do you punish them? Then they teach you leadership. Okay? And now when you're president, you have these 60 million people. Yeah, who are notorious, who are the hunger, who are hungry. Then that experience will bring you here. So to me, that's why I say bring a family as an institution, because there is where we build leaders of different ethics and cultures and how they treat others. Because if they care about the sick, when you tell that your population is sick, you will show the concern. If you told that your population has hunger, you will treat them because he knows how to treat. And we have the notorious. Yes, how do you treat even the notorious? How do you punish them? How do you reward the ones who are doing it? So you brought something that is very true, that we need to bring a family institution, and this has been like a big discussion in Tanzania on different religious leaders, the Muslim and Christian. How do we really build the family institution? Because out of the family is where we have the political leaders across, and the way they are going to treat the mass depends on how they get the values and morals from the family. It's a challenge, but I think it's something that we need to work out.
To reimagine the family. Yeah, and the household as a positive, safe space.
Yeah, and work it to be really a safe space that we know we can share, and we are ready to reward, we are ready to punish slowly for the ones and take care. Yeah, because at the end, we have it, and the punishment might not be very heavy. It might be like, you can get it today. Yeah, it's a big punishment for a child. And today we are going out, you will remain because you are a notorious one. Okay, you remain home. And the rest will go just for the sun and walk. And it really goes into. So to me, it's like we don't punish them to dehumanize them, but to teach a certain kind of settings and what in a manner that we don't abuse their rights as individuals and beginnings. Just
we correct them.
Yeah, we correct. And that also shows as the leader. You know, sometimes you stand and you see how the leader corrects another person in the public, and you're like, no, that is it's dehumanizing that leader. She or he is leading in public saying, no, you're stupid. And then you can imagine your boss going back, what are you going to tell the other? And it's like, it's a big mistake, but that was not the way to correct. If you're moral, you could just fall and say, no, that is wrong, you shouldn't do it. Okay, and tomorrow.
On that note of on your call for compassionate leadership stem from, I hope, diverse family settlements. I will have to end this very interesting seminar. Thank you so much for coming to the book headquarters and for speaking with me and with our guests today. And I hope you have a good time in Stockholm and lots of fruitful meetings.
Thank you. It was also a great pleasure to be part of a woman sort of, I was going to say woman-led, but woman-run. Because one of the things that we found in COVID was a lot of the voices making decisions and calling for things were male. It's like the women disappeared entirely. So it's great to be part of this again. Thank you.
Thank you.
But the great decisions were made by women state chiefs.
Yeah.
In the States led by women,
New Zealand.
things were better.
Thank you so much.